Good morning. I'd like to call the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting to order. And I'd like to welcome everyone, both in the public who's watching and those of you who are here participating and watching. This is a continuation of our meetings where we try to prepare for the next session. So we will be getting several important reports from various aspects of state government. But before I turn to the agenda, I'd like to ask April to please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Saslaw. Senator Normant. Senator Hanger.
Here.
Senator Lucas.
Aye.
Senator Newman.
Yes.
Senator Ruff.
Here.
Senator Vogel. Senator Barker.
Here.
Senator Edwards. Senator Deeds.
Here.
Senator Locke. Senator Peterson. Senator Marsden.
Here.
Senator Eben.
Here.
Senator McClellan. Here. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Turning to our agenda, the first presentation will be the September revenue report from Secretary Flores. Unfortunately, it's a positive report. That will be followed by an update on the Virginia Lottery by Kevin Hall, the Executive Director of the Lottery. And then we will hear from Dr. James Lane, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, on an overview of pre-K through 12 education for this current school year. And the final presentation will be a status update on the Virginia retirement system by Patricia Bishop, the director of the VRS. And now let's get started with Secretary Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members and staff. Without objection, I'm going to not wear a mask while I'm speaking, if that's okay with you guys. Madam Chair, members, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning to provide you with an update on the current economic outlook, our current economic situation, as well as our revenue performance through September. I think the bottom line is that we've hit a few roadblocks in the last month or so with the resurgence of the virus, especially related to the Delta variant and some supply chain issues. But you're going to see from this report, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, that the current revenue performance continues to just chug along. We're doing actually very well, and it's suggestive of a recovering economy. Make sure I got my clicker here. Okay, so as I mentioned, Madam Chair, I'm going to touch on some of the national and state economic indicators as we do each month. I'm going to give you an update on September revenue collections for the general fund as well as Commonwealth Transportation Fund revenues, and give you an update of where we are in terms of the revenue forecasting schedule. In terms of the national and state economic indicators, there is a mixed bag, but more positive than negative. You can see, and I've mentioned this the last couple of times that we've met, that real GDP growth rose very healthily in the first half of the year, but everybody expected to see a little bit of a decline with the resurgence of the virus related to the Delta variant. And you're likely to see growth in the 2 to 3% range in the third quarter, as opposed to the 6.7 and 6.3% growth that you've seen in the first half of the year, and then start to pick up after that latter part of the year, especially into next year. You see that reflected in the labor market, where we only added 194,000 jobs to payrolls in September. That is coming off of strong gains that were revised upwards. In July and August, we're averaging nationally 550,000 new jobs over the last 3 months. So again, suggestive of a strong and growing economy. The unemployment rate did fall slightly in September. Initial claims for unemployment also fell from 364 to 326. We're slowly making our way to the benchmark that is indicative of a healthy economy, and that's 250. We're not quite there yet, but again, we've slowly been tracking to that measure. In terms of the leading indicators from the Conference Board, you saw it rise 0.9% in August. That it was ahead of expectations, so that's a good sign. Not surprisingly, consumer confidence took a hit, again, because of the Delta variant. We were starting to reopen. I think people thought we were getting back to normal, and then we got slammed once again and reminded that the virus is still here. So you saw consumer confidence take a hit. Turning to the next slide, in terms of inflation, CPI did rise 0.3% in August. We're 5.2% compared to August of last year. Core inflation, when you take out some of the more volatile factors, is running at 4% compared to a year ago. Skipping down to payroll employment, you saw that you may remember last month, payroll employment had risen by 3.8%. We're down to 2.2% in August, driven mostly by Northern Virginia, a little bit less so in Hampton Roads, and only 0.4% in Richmond and Petersburg. And again, that is largely a reflection of the Delta variant putting a tamped down employment. And then I'll let you read the last few bullet points of the other measures. In terms of overall general fund revenue collections, you see very strong growth in September following growth that we had seen in August. So 18.4% in September, following almost 19% in August. I will point out that we are comparing to an economy last year that you guys know was at a virtual standstill. You had COVID cases rising, no vaccine approved or even on the horizon, and no indication that we were going to receive not one, but two additional federal stimulus packages in the waning days of the Trump administration and in the first few months of the Biden administration. So that certainly has helped us. And you see that here. Growth is driven by payroll withholding, both wages and salaries, robust sales tax collections, and corporate income tax payments, or estimated payments from corporations and individuals. On a year-to-date basis, we're up 10.6%. That is ahead of the forecasted decline of 8%. You'll remember that we finished fiscal year 21 at a very high note, and we haven't adjusted the forecast for 22. So all of these comparisons are to a forecast that was done last November. On a year-to-date basis, as I mentioned, we're up 10.6% compared to that decline of 8%. In terms of withholding, so wages and salaries, we've seen broad-based growth, again suggestive of a recovering economy. We grew 9.9% in September, following growth of 12.7% in August. And again, this is across most of our industry, so that's a positive. Year to date, we're looking at collections of about 9.7% compared to the same period last year, and that's ahead of the annual projected growth of 1.7%. In terms of non-withholding, and you guys know this because you've been around for a little while, non-withholding is one of our most volatile revenue sources, and you see this in the fluctuation, especially in April, May, and June. So this is something we will be watching very carefully because it did contribute almost to half of the surplus that we experienced in 21. Whether that continues is still an unknown, so we want to be very careful of that. In September, came in very strong, 25.2% above projections. You've seen more individuals being required to make estimated payments, and those payments are larger. So, and the next data point for this, and again, we'll be monitoring this throughout the fall and into December and January. The next significant milestone is January 15th. So we'll report that at that time. A little bit more granularity here on non-withholding tax collections, and I know this is a little bit hard to see, so I apologize, but I'll draw your attention to the bottom left-hand corner. As I mentioned, you've got more taxpayers making estimated payments, growing from $297 to $428, so a significant jump, and those payments are much larger, as you see there. What we don't know, looking at the bottom right-hand side there in purple, is whether or not these upward trends will continue. I suspect that they will. And the reason I say that, if you look at FY13 and FY14, that was the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, and you had a lot of consumers or individuals reacting to that change, making change in their tax withholdings. We don't have any changes like that on the horizon, so we would anticipate that that trend will continue, and that should be a positive going forward. But again, something we need to watch very carefully because it is a volatile revenue source. In terms of our individual income tax refund, September isn't a significant month. Through September, we've issued $175 million in individual refunds compared to $280 from last year. There was a spillover effect. You may recall some individuals erroneously filed in July, consistent with the federal deadlines, not ours in Virginia. And so we had more refunds issued last year compared to this year. So if you back that out, we're basically even. In terms of net individual income tax collections, you see through the first 3 months of the year, we're up 7.6% compared to an estimated decline, of 7.6%. So turning to the next slide, Madam Chair, in terms of sales tax collections, and again, you're hearing this theme where we're above in almost all of our categories. In September, we came in at almost 21% in terms of sales tax collections, following growth of 20.2% in August. Again, we're seeing broad-based growth here. Inflation is reflected in these numbers. How much, we're not sure. Also some supply chain issues, which is also exacerbating that problem of inflation. Year to date, we're up 16.7%, and that's above a projected decline of 4.2%. In terms of corporate income tax collections, I mentioned to you a couple of months ago that September is a significant month. It's the first estimated payment due this fiscal year. That came in very strong, 41.3%, and again, reflective of broad-based gains across industries. Through the first quarter of fiscal year 22, so through September, collections have increased 36.5%, ahead of an estimated decline to meet the forecast of 16.1%, so a very dramatic change there. And again, we're comparing to last year when things were still a bit rocky. But the bottom line is that more corporations are making more money, and they're submitting or remitting their taxes accordingly. Through the first quarter, you see that we've collected 36% of projected fiscal year's net corporate payments. That's ahead of the annual benchmark of about 25%. So again, that's a positive sign going forward, and you'll probably see some increases there. In terms of recordation and insurance premium taxes, recordation is primarily related to, again, a strong housing market, lots of refinancing activities, and even though the housing market has cooled a little bit, you're still seeing a strong revenue growth here. And you'll remember last year we grew by 41% above projection. So we only grew by 9% year to date, and that's ahead of the forecast of a decline of 31.3%. So again, positive. I would also point out that we collected more in the July to September period than we have since 2006. So in 15 years, that's the most we've received for that first quarterly payment. Insurance premium taxes, there's no story here. Deposits up to $181 million must be transferred to the Transportation Trust Fund. So after that, they will be made deposits to the general fund. So there's no story there. Summarizing, Madam Chair, and I would highlight the green bars under withholding and sales. That's our bread and butter, and you see that we grew by 9.7% year to date, or we have grown, as well as 16.7% in sales. So significantly above the annual estimate. Again, that is compared to last year's forecast. But non-withholding was also up, corporate taxes are up, and recordation taxes are up. So almost across the board, we are up. That is a result of the strong revenue trends that we've seen through the first months. But again, I want to emphasize that this is compared to a period last year where the economy was not chugging along like it is now. In terms of Commonwealth Transportation Fund revenues, I just wanted to give you an update here. You look at motor fuels taxes, motor vehicle sales tax, and retail sales tax. That counts for most of the revenues that we see from taxes and fees that are deposited into the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. You can see that we beat our estimate, or have beaten our estimate in all of these categories. We do anticipate that we're going to see a slower growth through the balance of the year because of those supply chain issues. If you've tried to buy a car lately, you know what I mean. And also, we grew so strongly in April, May, and June of last year, you're probably seeing less year-over-year growth in that last quarter of fiscal year 22. So, Madam Chair, the last slide I have for you is just a reminder of our revenue forecasting schedule. We did convene the Joint Advisory Board of Economists last week. There was surprising consensus about the outlook. I think there's going to be a little bit of a slower growth, as I mentioned earlier, in the latter part of this fiscal year, but that should pick up after January and certainly through the balance of next year. The Governor's Advisory Council will meet, which is business leaders across the Commonwealth, in mid-November after your retreats, and we'll hear from business leaders who will look at what the economists have said about the outlook, and they will weigh in what they're seeing on the ground. So from those business leaders, and that, of course, will form the basis of the governor's budget recommendations that he'll issue in December, mid-December. So, Madam Chair, that was relatively quick. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Are there questions? Senator Marsden.
Thank you. Secretary Flores, I was just curious. Of course, we went through a number of years without being able to tax the internet, and then the Wayfair decision came out. Do you have any idea where we would be if we weren't able to tax internet sales?
Senator Marsden, Madam Chair, and Senator Marsden, I think we would be worse off. How much worse off, I'm not sure. And we can try to give you a more precise answer, but I think the timing was good. I mean, we talked about imposing a tax on internet sales for many years. We finally got around to doing it, and I think the timing was positive for us.
Okay, just curious. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Eben.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask the Secretary about the hospitality industry and the recovery or lack of recovery in the business travel segment. I know we reserved some funds for potential use from the recovery plan, and I'm just wondering, is that still lagging, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Madam Chair and Senator Edben, I have to believe that, unfortunately, the timing of when decisions were made to appropriate those ARPA dollars may have been a little behind. I mean, we didn't make a decision until mid-August. By that time, the season was almost over. I'm thinking Virginia Beach mostly, and Williamsburg too, likely.
I'm thinking specifically of the business travel too, business travelers.
Madam Chair and Senator Eben, well, I'm going to have to get back with you. I'm not real sure. I think businesses have not, especially with the resurgence of the variant, I don't think they have started to allow for travel as much. I think there was probably a little bit more travel, but then that has slowed down as well. And that may be contributing to part of their corporate profits as well, because they pulled that back on some of those expenses that they would normally have. But we can look into that for you.
Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess a different way to ask Senator Marsden's question is, could you give us, and if not today, at another time, a breakdown of the sales tax that has come in through the internet versus traditional brick and mortar? And I think it'd be interesting to see how those trend lines are comparing over time since we began taxing the internet sales.
Madam Chair and Senator McClellan will do that.
Are there further questions? Okay, I just wanted to make a comment that occurred to me as you were talking. Before we get too exuberant about great ideas for spending money, I think it would be really helpful if during our retreat we got a report on what bills in the drawer we have, as Senator Stosh used to call it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam Chair,
Secretary.
members.
Oh, Senator Norman had a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is a comment sort of in response or amplifying Senator Eben's inquiry. I think the hospitality recovery is fluctuating based upon the venue. Of course, what's continuing to hurt Northern Virginia until they come up with the per diem and business travel, that's significantly impacted. But across the industry, the lack of significant conference meetings is also causing a little bit of a chill in the hospitality industry. And as Senator Deeds and I were talking on the side, another significant issue is labor. Labor is a huge issue in the hospitality, whether it's in the restaurants or the hotels. And you've seen some pretty significant modifications. If any of you have been to maybe a hotel in a recent month or so, you'll find they're not doing an exhaustive cleaning every day, that they are doing that only upon checkout, and that has held down the cost on housekeeping, but is also an adjustment to the lack of labor.
Madam Chair,
Senator Dees.
if I could, in the community where I live, a hotel's a major employer. And last March, they went from 800 employees to 45 employees overnight. They shut down. The $300 extra unemployment is the only thing that kept those people going. And now that that's ended, the hotel is reopened. They've got less than half their rooms open. They still can't find employment. I think that goes against the view that some people expressed for a number of weeks, that extra unemployment compensation was keeping people out of the labor market. People are kept out of the labor market because they don't have child care, or for a lot of other reasons other than that extra money. It's gone now, and they're still not coming back.
Senator McClellan.
Madam Chair, related to that, a number of hotels also relied heavily on the J-1 visa program for certain employees. I don't know if that program has been reinstated, but for a long period of time during the pandemic, those visas were not granted. And some of the discussions I've had with some hotels, that has had a big impact on their labor force as well.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. That brings us to our next presenter, Kevin Hall, the Executive Director of the Virginia Lottery. Good morning.
Madam Chair, if I can take off my mask for the
Yes.
presentation. It's good to visit with members of the committee in person again. I'm Kevin Hall, the Executive Director of the Lottery. If you'll indulge me, a couple of key members of our staff I'd like to introduce you to that are here to keep me out of trouble, basically. Gina Smith, who we recruited from the Maryland Lottery and Casino Oversight Agency, is helping us build out the expanded gaming infrastructure. You may know Deborah Courtney, our Director of Finance, and Kelly G. is our Manager of Government Relations. Our Deputy Director, your former colleague, Frank Wagner, could not be here today. He actually is giving a presentation at the Commissioners of Revenue Association meeting this morning, but he sends his regards. I have been asked to brief the committee today on a status report on lottery performance, where we are at the 10-month mark with online sports betting, the agency's progress so far in building out regulatory infrastructure for casino gaming, and I'd like to end with a couple of comments for the committee on our stepped-up efforts to promote safe, responsible gaming. Governor Northam was kind enough to attend our July Lottery Board meeting, where we announced record FY21 year-end results. At the time, I was bold enough to tell the governor we had just concluded our most significant and successful year ever. By every metric, FY21 was a remarkable success for the lottery, for our players, our retailers, and for K-12 public education. There are some notable reasons why. Most of the retailers who provide lottery products powered through the uncertainty of the pandemic without closing. I don't want to minimize how difficult that was for many of them. Access to other forms of gaming, as you might imagine, was sharply limited. Casino gaming in adjoining states, Rosie's locations were briefly shuttered and then reopened with restrictions. Also in FY21, the lottery successfully launched the new online iLottery platform. And let me again thank Senators Barker and Norman for their bipartisan leadership on that legislation. And in December and January, Virginians were caught up in the excitement of some significant jackpot rolls in both Powerball and Mega Millions, which tends to draw out occasional lottery customers. So all of those factors contributed to a record-breaking FY21. Overall sales increased from $2.2 billion to $3.3 billion, a 50% increase. Player prizes up significantly, retailer commission up significantly. Profits for K-12 deposited in the proceeds fund were up 30% and totaled $765 million. Importantly, with the launch of online iLottery, which has continued to exceed projections as we expected and as we have seen in other states, it does not appear to be having a negative impact on sales at the retail counter. Even as iLottery was introduced into the market, we saw store sales increase 15% year over year, which we were happy to see. In the first quarter of this fiscal year, I can report continued strong sales performance for lottery products across every category. At the end of the first quarter, sales of $940 million were 37% ahead of last year, same quarter last year. Profits of around $200 million are about 17% above the same quarter last year. We believe that this is due to several factors that may not necessarily carry forward across the entire fiscal year. We are, as Secretary Flores indicated, seeing continued gradual reopening of the overall economy. We are seeing the continuation of some federal stimulus, which has boosted discretionary consumer spending across the board. We're seeing the continued effects of a lot of hard work by the agency to constantly fine-tune and improve both the product and distribution. And of course, we're seeing continued strong growth and success with iLottery as we now enter the second year of online sales. We are currently working through our forecasting process at the agency level. We will present a revised sales and revenue forecast to our lottery board next week for their consideration and anticipated approval. And then we will share that with the administration, and those numbers will be included in the governor's December budget presentation. But like every successful consumer-facing business, we are constantly analyzing data and conducting research for ways to make sure that we're meeting consumers and their expectations in the marketplace. And we certainly are pleased to see that the first quarter results have set a new high water mark compared to the prior 3 years. I will pause to see if any members have questions on lottery performance before we move on to sports betting. All
Okay,
right.
please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are now in the 10th month of legal online sports wagering in Virginia. You may recall that when the U.S. Supreme Court opened this door back in 2018, many states, Virginia included, saw the opportunity to provide a safe legal alternative to sports wagering that was being conducted already largely on illegal offshore sports books. Since that Supreme Court ruling in 2018, 32 states have moved to enact some form of legal sports wagering. In January of 2021, the lottery began issuing mobile sports wagering permits. We have, based on the statute that the legislature approved, created a program with what we think are rational rules of the road, with a reasonable tax rate that was set in statute, and some robust regulatory requirements and consumer protections. The lottery has issued 10 sportsbook permits so far. 9 operators are currently in market. The first 2 sportsbooks launched at the end of January. Some additional sportsbooks entered the market before the Super Bowl in February. More still got into the market before the NCAA college basketball tournaments in March. Those 2 events are seen as among the most significant sports wagering opportunities on the sports calendar every year. From launch through the end of August, Virginians have legally wagered nearly $1.7 billion. Bettors have won more than $1.5 billion. That left about $150 million in net sports betting revenue. Virginia's statute allows the sports books to deduct the cost of promotional bonuses. Those are the free bets and other incentives that are used to attract new customers and to keep existing customers engaged. Operators are also allowed by statute to deduct other expenses, including their federal excise taxes on the gross handle. After these authorized deductions, we're left with a combined adjusted revenue number through the end of August at just under $71 million. And at Virginia's 15% tax rate, we collected around $11 million in state tax revenue from sports betting activities. By statute, again, 97.5% of that tax revenue is deposited in the general fund. 2.5% is earmarked for the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health to continue standing up some problem gambling services and resources. Shown a different way, a more visual way, this gives you some indication of the seasonality of sports wagering across the calendar, the fluctuations that we also will expect to see in tax revenue collections. You also perhaps get another view of the small profit margins in sports wagering. Typically, 93, 94, 95% of what comes in goes right back out in the form of winnings. I will note that the 9 sports books currently operating in Virginia will report September results by tomorrow. The 20th of each succeeding month is when they report their activities. Other states that have already begun to report on September sports betting have seen significant increases with wagering related to the NFL and college football seasons. I also wanted to point out, there we go, 2 significant compliance actions that we've taken so far as the regulator of mobile sports betting. In the first instance, an operator failed to activate the required geolocation screening on wagers. Geolocation ensures that only people physically located in the Commonwealth can place a wager on the platform. That's required both by your statute and our regulations. In this instance, the operator inadvertently left the geolocation screen in test mode when the app went live. In the second instance, an operator's upload of names from the voluntary exclusion list, the names of those individuals who have self-registered to be excluded from marketing materials and from placing wagers, their upload froze up when the software encountered a data field it didn't expect. In this particular case, it was a suffix attached to a name, senior, junior, to third. And the result was that an individual whose name was on the voluntary exclusion list was improperly allowed to place a wager on the sportsbook app. In both instances, the operators promptly reported the apparent violation to us as the regulator. In both instances, they worked with us to define the scale and the scope of the apparent violation. In both instances, they submitted a written plan to ensure future compliance. And in both instances, they signed consent agreements with the lottery as regulator, and financial settlements were deposited in the literary fund. In the case of the responsible gaming violation, the operator also made a contribution to the Virginia Problem Gambling Council. I will pause if there are any questions on sports betting before we move to casinos.
Senator Evan and then Senator Norman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask about the allowable expenses of deductible promos and bonuses and marketing expenses. I don't know if you know this now or if you can find out for me. Is that the norm in other states?
I can say that many, but perhaps not all, states with a regulated sports betting market allow for some deduction of that expense. I am aware of a study by the Tax Foundation that indicated Virginia might be alone among the states in allowing a carry forward of a negative tax balance month to month.
Thank you.
Senator Norman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Hall, I'm interested on a number of levels about sports betting, one of which I'll come back to later on. But on slide 8, you indicated 276,000 problem gambling treatment and support funds. Is that just eyewash pursuant to statute, or is there actually some positive intervention addressing that? And I'm not talking about running those salutary ads that are fixed at the tail end of the media advertisements. Is there really anything going on there?
Madam Chair. Senator Norman, that percentage was fixed in statute. There is a similar carve-out of a dedicated revenue stream that will come from casino gaming revenues at the appropriate time. It's my understanding, and I would defer to the Department of Behavioral Health to speak for themselves, but they are at the front end of building up what they hope will be an appropriate program with adequate resources and personnel to address what could be an increase in the number of individuals seeking specialized gambling disorder treatment services.
Madam Chairman.
It's a small number, Senator Norman. It will grow over time. My
Senator
recollection
Norman.
also of the impact statement from DPB was that there was never an expectation that it would cover the full cost of what may be needed at that department.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hall, I'd be interested in some follow-up on that because as I previously characterized it, I think it's strictly eyewash, and it's going to be based on self-report. Basically, on how behavioral health goes out and solicits those individuals who are going to acknowledge that they have a gaming problem into, while $276,000 is a de minimis amount of money to go and build up an expansion of an agency where there may not be the quantifiable delivery of services just makes me suspect. That's an editorial comment, and you don't have to comment back on it.
Thank you, Senator.
Would anyone from behavioral health like to comment? I don't see anyone. Okay, they're not, okay. Good, okay. Next.
Thank you, appreciate it. As members of the committee know, casinos are on a longer runway than on the accelerated schedule that was set in statute for the launch of sports betting. Of course, that's due to the local referendum requirement that was in the statute, the construction schedules, obviously, for each of the projects, and because of the comprehensive nature of casino licensing requirements. The lottery's legal team has converted your casino legislation into very detailed, technical regulatory language. Those proposed regulations move to the 60-day public comment and stakeholder input phase next week, I believe. We anticipate that our board will review any proposed changes that we might make as a result of that input at their January meeting. And we would anticipate the permanent casino regs could take effect shortly after a review by the new administration in the first half of calendar year 2022. In the meantime, our board has adopted temporary casino regulations last February, And that has allowed us to begin the licensing process back in April. And this entails the comprehensive reviews of each casino operator, the business structure, the financial suitability of both the operator and many of its key individual managers, their compliance history in other regulated jurisdictions where they do business. It also will entail suitability investigations and licensing of each casino operator's contractors, suppliers, many of their vendor partners as well. Since we opened the casino license application window in April, we have been working very closely with the casino groups in Bristol, Danville, Norfolk, Portsmouth, over their submissions of the appropriate application forms and the supporting materials and documentation, which allows us to conduct the in-depth licensing investigations. We speak with each casino group on a regular basis, and each casino operator knows exactly what materials and documentation we require for these investigations to continue moving forward. We also have simultaneously been filling out the agency's capacity to conduct these investigations and then to provide the ongoing compliance with both casino gaming and sports betting. We also have hired an investigative firm with extensive experience in this area to keep us on track and where necessary to help train up our own people. Looking at the current status of our conversations with the casino groups, and looking at the status of the licensing process so far, it appears likely that the agency will be in a position to ask the lottery board to sign off on issuing the first of the casino gaming licenses in the summer of 2022. Finally, as you know, your legislation authorized the city of Richmond to move forward on a different timeline compared to Bristol, Danville, Norfolk, and Portsmouth. Those four cities held their successful referenda last November. The city of Richmond is holding their casino referendum next month. I'll pause now to see if there are any questions about casino gaming.
Are there any questions? You don't want it now? Okay. I guess there aren't any.
I want to conclude with an acknowledgement of our responsibilities in promoting safe and responsible gaming. Both the sports betting and casino statutes required the lottery to create a voluntary exclusion program. That's an online portal where individuals can choose to self-exclude themselves from any state-sanctioned, account-based gambling activities. So that includes horse race wagering. It could include some historical horse race wagering at Rosie's. It includes online lottery. There may be some forms of charitable gaming. It will eventually include casino gaming. Any gaming where it is account-based with an individual's name and identifying characteristics. Individuals can choose to self-exclude for 2 years, for 5 years, or for life. Since we launched the exclusion program in January, 119 individuals have added their name to the registry. We pushed that updated list out to every regulator and operator daily. So far, about 80 of the 119, or about 2/3, have selected the 5-year exclusion from all gaming. The Virginia Lottery has always acknowledged its responsibilities in the area of responsible gaming. For years now, the lottery has funded the toll-free helpline that is administered by the nonprofit Virginia Council for Problem Gambling. This hotline connects callers with resources and services related to problem gambling. That number appears on every lottery ticket, on every lottery ad. The sportsbook operators are required to post the number as well on their advertising and on their mobile apps. With the recent expansion of the types of legal gaming available, the lottery has increased its annual financial support for this helpline by 25%. And we're in regular contact with the council. And if additional resources are needed, we'll look to provide them ourselves or make you aware of the need. Finally, the lottery has operated its own nationally certified responsible gaming program for more than a decade now. And Senator Norman, we're looking to leverage that experience in this space to help build relationships and encourage greater coordination among all of the parties that are now operating in this space. All of the operators, all of the regulators, the Virginia Council, and also the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health. We want to make sure there's a commitment to acknowledge the shared responsibility and to make sure that there are relationships and ongoing conversations so that we can stay on top of any trends that might cause some concern. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Senator Saslaw and then Senator Norman.
When all the 4 or 5 casinos are up and running, are in the pipeline now, what do you estimate the state's take on that will be, total, collectively, total?
I am going to defer to the comprehensive JLARC analysis. And it's my recollection that they and their consultants who worked on the study noted that there's kind of a tiered taxation structure. I think it's 3 tiers, and it's based on overall revenue, what the rate is. And I seem to recall that JLARC's best estimate of state revenue once the 5 casinos are operating would be in the $250 to $300 million a year range.
The reason I asked that, Madam Chairman,
Senator
is
Saslaw.
I seem to remember reading in the Washington Post a few years ago that from that MGM facility over there just across the Potomac River from Old Town Alexandria, that Maryland's take is somewhere going to be from that one facility between $250 and $300 million.
I do know that there is credible analysis that about 40% of the foot traffic crosses the Potomac from Virginia.
It's higher than that.
Yeah.
It's they estimate MGM had estimated about a little over 50%. But you know, I'm just curious as if we're going to have 4 or 5 casinos, and maybe they'll produce what one is producing in Maryland.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't we go over and say to them at MGM, we want $50 million the first week of every January, we're going to put one up in Old Town.
Madam Chair, I trust I'm not expected to respond to.
No need. No need.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, there's good extortion and there's bad extortion. Good is when you do it. Bad is when the other guy does it.
Senator Norman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Jumping around a little bit, I really would be interested in receiving not a protracted report, but a report on all of these individuals that are dealing with problem gaming, how many problem gamblers they've been able to rehabilitate. Second point, Madam Chairman, I remain increasingly concerned about the financial dependency that Virginia is moving for relying on gaming revenues, and I respect what other states are doing, but I am concerned about that, and there seems to be minimal discussion tying it back to the problem gambling. minimal discussion and focus on what the societal impact of gaming is on the expanded basis that we are going. And I don't really care what Tennessee or anybody else is doing. I'm concerned about Virginia, and there are societal impacts. I remember when we first went to the lottery, and there was a 7-Eleven right across the street from the GAB. And I went in there one Friday morning to get some coffee, and there was probably a line of somewhere between 10 and 15 construction workers who were working on the City Hall building. And every one of them was there to try to cash their check to buy lotteries. So there's a societal impact on it. I don't know that you can control it, but I may put in what I would call a Warren Berry bill of amusement. I am offended when I hear the moniker, Virginia is for betters. I am offended by that is what we are trying to label our Commonwealth as, and I realize that there's some advertising. It's just, well, you would, but that's because you've been winning, I've been losing on it. But a very serious question. Do you have any update on where we are on euphemistically referred to as games of skill? That's been through some versions. We were going to ban it, and then the governor decided he wanted to try to get some more revenues out of it and wanted to back up on his representations. And Madam Chairman and I had to remind him of the representation that he made. How effective has the Commonwealth been in shutting down these game of skills?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Senator Norman, I appreciate the question.
I'm sure you do.
My comments may be limited because there is ongoing litigation about the constitutionality of the ban. I can remind you that it was the fall of 2019, I believe, in an appearance before this very committee where I expressed concern about the proliferation of these devices, especially in the retail setting where we do the bulk of the lotteries business. And I recall pointing out that the devices were unregulated, untaxed. We had measured a credible estimate of impact on lottery sales due to the presence of these machines. And we worked with the administration on a bill to regulate and tax. The legislature had a different idea and moved forward with a ban. At this point, 1 quarter in, I would have only anecdotal evidence of a material impact on lottery sales just in the 3 months since the machines were ostensibly removed from the market. I am not hearing reports from our own folks that are in and out of these stores once a week or once every other week that there's any significant issue with the machines still operating, at least not in the retail setting where we do our business.
Madam Chairman.
Senator Norman.
I didn't intend, even by inference, to be critical of lottery. On that, I just am kind of curious because anecdotally I hear a lot. And as a matter of fact, even last week, and I believe it was up in the Fredericksburg, Stafford, Spotsylvania area, where in fact there are almost many casinos being run out of retail strip shopping centers on it. And while the windows may have a dark tint on them when you go in, that it's a fairly active situation. And I think Madam Chairman and I are certainly aware of the litigation on it, at the ridiculous accusations that are being made. And the only thing more ridiculous is attorneys who are embracing the litigation. But I would appreciate Lottery continuing to monitor it.
I'd just like to comment that I continue to agree with Senator Norman on the pernicious nature of these gray machines. And I am particularly concerned that they kind of beguile people into using them. You go to the convenience store to buy some milk, and suddenly there you are right in your neighborhood with these machines facing you. And I personally will continue to oppose them every step of the way, in every way I can. But any other questions for Director? Thank you so much.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry.
I
Senator
guess-
McClellan.
I guess a comment which is probably an inconvenient truth, and setting aside how we feel individually about gray machines or gambling in convenience stores or gas stations or grocery stores, it is an inconvenient fact that for many gas stations in particular and convenience stores, those products were the only thing keeping them open, particularly during the pandemic. And as there have been transitions and will continue to be a transition from petrol-based fuel to electronic vehicles. So we need to think about if the public policy we continue to follow is going to be, that's not going to be a revenue source for those industries, we need to think about that and what they can replace it with. Because unfortunately, that is a fact of the economy we have to think about in making our public policy decisions.
Not to have a running debate, but while I would agree with you to some extent, it's more their responsibility to figure out their plan.
Madam Chair, I agree with that as well, but their perspective is they followed the rules. They did what was legal, and many of them feel that they didn't have an adequate seat at the table when the policy decision was being made. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but they're not here to present their point of view. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay, I think we're finished.
Thank you, Madam
this
Chair.
part.
Thank you, members.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from the Superintendent of Public Instruction at the Department of Education, Dr. James Lane.
Good morning, Senator Howell, members of the Senate Finance Committee. Great to see you in person today. I have a presentation for you today primarily focused on re-benchmarking and the results of where we are with re-benchmarking to date. Following that, we have some information on pandemic impacts in schools, especially as it relates to federal pandemic funding. To start with re-benchmarking, our estimate at this time for the 22 through 24 biennial direct aid re-benchmarking is $331 million. You will note that that is significantly less than we've seen in recent re-benchmarkings. Some of the things that are increasing costs, obviously prevailing salaries, cost of support positions, healthcare inflation, but we also had some significant steps in the re-benchmarking process that have decreased costs, especially in the non-personal or non-personnel support areas. For instance, school divisions are not traveling to conferences as much and things like that. And obviously, for many school divisions in the previous biennium, there were certain periods of time in a lot of school divisions where they weren't transporting pupils at all because of the virtual nature of education at certain times. We do have several steps remaining, which includes the adding the sales tax estimates, lottery proceeds estimates. The big impact will be updating enrollment. We collect enrollment, as you know, as of September 30. And with that just being a couple weeks ago, we typically release final September 30 enrollment in the coming months, usually in the winter. And then in November, we typically release local composite index. I just want to make one note about the rebenchmarking number, and I put it here at the bottom of the slide. We did keep the FY22 no loss funding in as a placeholder in the base. We have some concern that when enrollment comes in and other matters, that costs could go up. So we discussed that with DPB, and they said, let's keep the no loss funding in as a placeholder. But you should know that were we to remove the no loss funding placeholder in the rebenchmarking estimate, rebenchmarking would actually only be a few $1 million at this time. So you can see that costs and spending in schools was significantly reduced over the past 2 years. Leaving rebenchmarking and heading to this school year, I am proud to announce that now every school in the Commonwealth, every public school in the Commonwealth is now open for full-time in-person learning. So thank you for the passage of Senate Bill 1303. I think that was essential to getting us to this point. School divisions are allowed to offer remote and virtual, and some parents are still continuing to select remote and virtual. But with the opening of Highland County on September 20th, every school, public school in the Commonwealth is now open. We continue to support virtual learning through the Virginia Department of Education for parents that are choosing it voluntarily through Virtual Virginia. Plus, our school divisions also have other vendors to support that. Virtual Virginia has now expanded to K through 12 full-time service. The General Assembly provides essentially 6,000 seats at the high school level. The elementary and middle school seats and those above 6,000 are funded on a tuition basis by local school divisions to Virtual Virginia. Whereas before the pandemic, Virtual Virginia usually had, I think, around 1,000 full-time students. Virtual Virginia is operating at this time with around 13,000 full-time virtual students. We did open this school year with certain health guidance from the Virginia Department of Health, as I'm sure you're aware of, especially focusing on mitigation strategies, such as the public health order from the Commissioner of Health that requires masks on school property. The most common question I've gotten is, how is the VISTA testing program, pooled testing program, going? We now have 88 school divisions that have, 88 school divisions or private schools that have committed to the program. 52 of those have already been matched with a vendor. 3 school divisions, Dickinson, Sussex, and Hopewell, have already begun pooled screen testing. We have sent 21 MOUs, 5 of which have been signed, 16 remain unsigned. We have 32 additional MOUs in process. That's a $257 million grant to the VDH. Obviously not a program managed by the Department of Ed. There have been a lot of questions about the VISTA testing program, and our school divisions have significantly increased their interest in that since last month when that was presented to members of the General Assembly and reported in the media. A little bit on enrollment. As I stated before, school enrollment as of September 30 has not been updated at this time. We're still collecting that, and we'll release that in the winter. But I thought it would be good to remind our members of a few moments in time. Your 2020 Chapter 1289 budget, based on September 30, 2019 data, had our school division enrollment at 1,257,000 students. When we came forward in Chapter 552 in 2021, that was significantly reduced by over 40,000 students to 1,213,000. And our final enrollment count on March 30 of this year, which is what we make final payments based on, was 1,210,000. So the September 30 decline in enrollment that we saw last year held pretty steady to the end of the year. We do expect some increases to this with enrollment this year, but anything on that would be anecdotal at this time. But some of the reasons I think that we expect an increase in enrollment to bump back to maybe our previous number is that you'll see that our most acute declines in enrollment based on that previous data were at the pre-K and kindergarten levels. Kindergarten specifically, the General Assembly allows parents to defer enrollment until the age of 6. And so we actually are anticipating, when enrollment is done this year, a huge spike in kindergarten enrollment, which may be a bubble that will carry forward through our schools for the next 13 years. We also saw some significant declines in the enrollment of preschool students, as you saw in the previous slide. Of course, the VPI overall preschool enrollment decreased by 18.5%, but enrollment slots were down 6%. Head Start enrollment was down 30%, and participation in child care subsidy dropped to a low of 14,500 in January, which was a 43% decline from those participating in subsidy pre-COVID-19. The General Assembly last year also took new action on student assessment to help us assess the impact of the pandemic on students. And with that, House Bill 2027, Senate Bill 1357 was passed that require now through course growth assessments in grades 3 through 8 math. I'm proud to announce we did launch those new assessments this year. They are computer adaptive, multiple choice assessments that assess students' reading and math ability in those grade levels. You may remember in that legislation that the new growth assessment initiative will actually grow over the next 3 years. This year, we will give the fall growth assessment and we'll compare growth to the spring SOL. In the second year of the initiative, we will add a mid-year winter assessment that will actually change the algorithm so that students can be tested on and off grade level. And then the third year, when we finalize the movement towards the growth assessment, we'll actually be adding more content further below grade level. And what's really great about this initiative is it will allow us to really hone in on exactly where a student is at the beginning and the middle of the year, so school divisions can plan their instruction and remediation to help students before they get to the SOL at the end of the year. The implementation of the growth assessment this fall went really well. There have been no major glitches, and all of our school divisions have begun, and most have completed that at this point. One note on the growth assessment that I'll share is we do report growth as part of the combined rate for accreditation. All SOL tests will be required this year. The federal government has a 95% participation requirement on our schools and school divisions, so you can fully expect that all SOL tests will be delivered as required under the federal government. You can also expect that our accreditation model will be back in place, but in the combined rate, we do report growth as well. We will measure fall to spring growth based on this new assessment, but we will also measure spring to spring growth so that schools will be able to see their year-over-year growth and their within-year growth in the accreditation model. Now, once we understand how our students are doing, the next step is to make sure that we're providing the supports and resources to help students recover from the pandemic. We released significant guidance in the spring of 2021 to help school divisions with this. We call it Virginia Learns. One of the really nice initiatives that was part of Virginia Learns is we put in place what we call just-in-time mathematics and quick checks, so that all throughout the year, in addition to the growth assessment that was required under legislation, our school divisions can be constantly checking in on the most important standards to make sure that students are being caught up. In addition to that, we identified what we call what I will call the power standards, but what the staff will say is the standards that are most important from a spiraling perspective, so as students continue through the curriculum, the most important skills that if they missed that in the past during the pandemic, to make sure they have their skills shored up so that they can move forward. In addition to that, we supported the school divisions with grants in the spring of 2021 of $62 million, which included required funding from the legislative session to ensure that our school divisions had funds for summer remedial programs and for in-school and after-school projects to help students recover. On Friday, we also announced our third round of our ESSER 3 grants to school divisions. So we did the $62.7 million with your support in the spring, and on Friday we announced the $107 million in ESSER 3 grants that school divisions can apply for. Keep in mind, Over $3.6 billion in federal pandemic relief funding has come to Virginia. Around $3.3 billion of those funds went directly to school divisions. And so our grant of $107 million is on top of what they've already received. And in this, school divisions can apply for funding to support student recovery. It does include the required $21 million in after-school grants. It does include another $21 million in required summer school grants. And then the rest is $65 million of the required $105 million in general, what's known as learning loss grants. And so you'll see some of the focus areas are developing tutor programs, building capacity of our teachers, and supporting teacher recruitment and retention. I will transition to recruitment and retention because that is probably the most acute issue that our school divisions will be reporting to you as you talk in your districts. We do collect data on staffing and teacher shortages. Like with enrollment, we collect that data in October. So I don't have specific data for you today of exactly where the teacher shortage is. I'll share some anecdotal information. I will say that we're hearing significant issues, not only in teacher vacancies and shortages, but now in a whole host of other areas, especially with bus drivers. Significant issues have been reported to us from our school divisions with shortages of bus drivers. So as part of your data collection requirements of us, we are expanding our data collection. We will release this data in the winter. We also expanded the exit survey so we can learn more about why individuals are leaving. We also know that we had a significant number of teachers retire, especially teachers that qualified for retirement over 65 were at some of the highest risks of COVID-19. Many teachers in those settings decided not to return to the classroom. And then, of course, we will continue to leverage the federal funds before us to support this initiative. Some data that I can share. In the special session, the General Assembly did set aside $11.5 million to support recruitment efforts for any individual hired after August 15th through November 15th. To date, we have collected data from 76 school divisions that are seeking what we call RIPE, Recruitment Incentive for Public Education funding. And as of August 15th, those 76 school divisions were reporting 4,922 instructional vacancies. So this does expand beyond just teachers to guidance counselors and other things. But just for a little bit of perspective, when we finally collect that data as of September 30, pre-COVID, we used to hover around, say, 800 to 1,000 vacancies. Now, that doesn't mean that on September 30th, we will still have 4,922 vacancies because a significant number of teachers are hired in those last couple weeks before the school year. But you can imagine that even based on just this RIPE data, that we'll see a significant increase in the teacher shortage as reported as of September 30th. Of course, your RIPE incentive does allow for a $2,500 incentive to be paid in not hard-to-fill positions and a $5,000 bonus that can be paid in our critical shortage areas. One of the other things that we're really proud of is that as of July 1st, the Virginia Department of Education now is responsible for child care and early learning in the Commonwealth due to legislation passed by the General Assembly. You may know Jenna Conway, who was the Chief School Readiness Officer for the Northam administration. Jenna Conway has now come to the Virginia Department of Education. She is our Deputy Superintendent of Child Care and Early Learning and will be leading this work moving forward. The transition from especially the programs at DSS and other locations to the Department of Education has been smooth. We've brought on nearly 100 new employees to the Virginia Department of Education to support this work. And so now, of course, the Virginia Department of Education is responsible for all aspects of the child care and early childhood system, and you have asked us to make sure that we create a statewide unified public-private early child care and education system, and I'm happy to report that things are going well in that transition, and obviously we're focused right now on the implementation of the new measurement improvement system, which we call VQB5. But I do want to talk about some of the pandemic impacts on our earliest learners. We do give statewide the PALS assessment. Only one school division in the Commonwealth does not deliver the PALS assessment. And what we know is that we're seeing a significant increase in our earliest learners missing the benchmark in reading. Actually, it's an interesting trend that reading is most acute in the earliest grades. The mathematics learning loss is much more acute in grades 3 through 8, and you even saw that in our SOL results this year. But as an example...
Madam Chair, well, then you can relate the reading loss to the closure of schools last year.
I think you can, of course, schools were open last year, but they were open in the virtual setting.
Right.
But what I think we can say is that in-person learning is certainly better for our students. But some significant data here from 19 to 20, of course, we'll be reporting the fall 21 data soon. We're just a little early for that. But you can see that in kindergarten and first grade especially, about 10% more students were missing the reading benchmark than prior to COVID. Now, to your point, Senator Deeds, this data actually shows us a little bit more about when schools were closed, because in the spring of 2020, that is actually when schools were closed. But in the fall of 20, we did open it all of last year. But many in virtual settings. I will say, by the time we got to the end of the school year, almost all of our school divisions had at least some form of in-person learning, so it varied throughout the year as well. In addition to that, we know from spring 21 data that our VKRP assessment, which essentially assesses kindergarten readiness, showed that 52% of Virginia's kindergartners are entering the year with at least one of the foundational skills lacking, whether that be their literacy, mathematics, or maybe their social health. There's been significant child care relief funding as well. I will certainly not detail all of this. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but $70 million in the original CARES Act. The Coronavirus Relief Fund added another $75 million. Often referred to as CARES 2, also as CARISA, another $203 million. And then finally in the American Rescue Plan, nearly $800 million came into the child care sector. Using these funds right now, Virginia has provided 4 rounds of direct cash assistance for a total of $200 million, or just under $200 million through these CARES grants. But I think one of the things that is also a part of this is the $488 million to develop and stabilize the child care system. And so you can see that these grants were for licensed, registered, and regulated programs as of March 11. We did 3 payments over a 9-month period, and certainly our open child care providers that participate will receive a one-time bonus of 20%. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about that data to share with you is that we've reopened nearly 2,300 programs that at one point closed during the pandemic, and at this point only 8% of providers that were open on March 2020 have not reopened to date. But like in our K-12 schools, our early childhood educator shortage is also extremely concerning. There's been significant research that shows that even a $1,500 incentive can reduce turnover by half in Virginia child care and family day homes. So we have increased our funding to $2,000 per educator in response to COVID-19, and are planning to support 5,000 educators this year with relief funds. Just a reminder on, finally, the K-12 funding. We first received in the, well, here were some of our, excuse me, let me go back. So here were some of our priorities. We first started focusing on devices and MiFis when schools first closed in the spring of 2020, because we knew we would be virtual for those first few months. We then turned our focus in the 2020-2021 school year to reopening our schools, and so a lot of supports for addressing some of the lost learning, also building out some of our data systems, expanding Virtual Virginia, supporting student mental health, and of course, the through-course assessments. The General Assembly has taken action on several of the COVID relief state set-asides. Of course, in FY21 and FY22, you set aside significant money for no-loss funding to support school divisions from losing funds that may have been impacted during the pandemic. You also set aside $40 million in lottery funds to support learning loss, and an additional $30 million from CARES 2, which was part of that big grant that we released in the spring. You also set aside $6.5 million to support students with disabilities that may be over age. Another nearly $9 million to create these growth assessments that we were able to launch this fall. Another $7 million to support a statewide learning management system as part of Virtual Virginia. And another $11.5 million is the recruitment incentive I've already mentioned. The first round of CARES Act funding was in March of 2020. $214 million went directly to our school divisions. The governor had a discretionary fund of $44 million, and the Department of Education managed $23.9 million in set-aside funds. All of the formula funds for school divisions are rolled out by Title I formulas, so it overweights school divisions that have higher percentages of students in poverty, except for the coronavirus relief funds, where the General Assembly released $220.8 million. You did it that one time on a per-pupil basis to support schools, and so that was weighted on the number of schools they had in each division. Then the CARES 2 funding, also known as the CRISA funding, sent $845 million to our school divisions through formula funds. Then finally, the American Rescue Plan, as I mentioned, $1.9 billion went directly to our school divisions through that fund. That also includes, in both of those sets of funds now for non-public schools. The Department of Education has been managing grant applications to our non-public schools for federal support, and it also included the $250 million you set aside for HVAC projects. This slide shows what we have been asked to reimburse by date, and you'll see that most of the reimbursements prior to this school year were focused on technology and digital instruction, as you can imagine, with the past 2 years. Other is essentially hazard pay and other benefits. Then you can see a lot of PPE and sanitation, some support for our non-public schools, and then some are special populations, mental health, construction, HVAC, renovation, and modeling at the bottom there. I think you're going to see the construction, HVAC, renovation, and remodeling numbers significantly increase over the next 3 years before these funds expire. Most construction projects are multi-year projects, and so you're probably not going to see the major reimbursements that you would typically see in that area until projects get closer to finalizing. And then finally, just a reminder on the final funds that are set aside at the state. We are required to set aside $105 million for learning loss. We did release $65 million of that $105 million in the grants I mentioned on Friday. We also had to set aside $21 million in 2 cases for summer and after-school programs. Those funds were released on grant applications on Friday. We were required to do consultation with stakeholders. I am proud to announce that as of last week, our state ARP plan was approved by the federal government, and so now we can fully spend all of our money, not just the first certain portions. There are state maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity requirements, and we're continuing to work with General Assembly staff on those as we move forward. And our focus on this money is obviously primarily on unfinished learning, targeting the students that were most impacted, getting our workforce stabilized, addressing the mental health needs of students, and providing safe in-person instruction. We do allow capital expenses, and many school divisions are taking us up on that as well, but our main priority is obviously learning for our students. With that, Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Superintendent. You've had quite a year. Quite a year. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Lane, welcome. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Madam Chair, I guess my question is that when your results came out on your test scores, we understand that it's been a rough year, but they were dramatic, right? I mean, and you would be the first, I guess, to see that about a 45% drop in mathematics for third graders and similar for sixth graders, and the science score and the reading score probably most concerning. As you're looking at this billions of dollars that are kind of coming through, what mechanisms and metrics have you set up to see what's going to help us recover? In other words, I know you have assessments, and we know we've got a return versus trend, and I know you know that, and we've got billions, right? But what's the nexus between the billions and the recovery, right? Are you guys have a mechanism to metric the recovery or expected recovery, or where we need to put more money? Is it more money in especially third grade reading, or how are you metricing the billions to the big problem?
Thank you, Senator Newman, for the question. It's a huge concern of mine, like you stated. In fact, I was at the superintendent's conference just yesterday talking to them about the importance of spending their funding wisely and giving them some strategies there. An important note that I should share is that of the $3.6 billion that has come to Virginia for these purposes, with just under $3.3 billion of that going directly to school divisions by formula, there were not a lot of opportunities given to us by the federal government to hold school divisions accountable for that. It ultimately, those funds that go out by formula are ultimately under their control. So we're using our leverage in a couple ways. First is we're providing them a lot of technical assistance, guidance, and professional development on how to wisely spend the funding. We are allowed to pre-approve any construction project, so we take extra care on ensuring that we don't improve a construction project till we feel like the school division has solid plans in the instructional area. And then for any of our state set-aside grants, one of the things that we've put in our set-aside grants is some requirements that if you're going to apply for funds on top of your local formula funds and you want to seek some of the state grant funding, you have to show that you have prioritized instruction and recovery in your own plan at the local level. And so we will not prioritize grants to school divisions that have not prioritized those funds in their locality. Those are some of our primary techniques. Obviously, we're going to continue to monitor the SOL results. I do think, Senators, that you will find a significant bounce back in test scores this year. A couple factors depressed scores, not only related to the pandemic, but just a couple things you should know. One is participation was significantly down. We did not have the number of students participate that we've had participate in past years. Once participation this year is back to 95%, I think that's inherently going to increase our scores. Number two, I think that we did not have all of our school divisions doing in-person learning. I think with everyone back in person this year, you're going to see a significant increase in scores. We also did not offer retakes in all of our school divisions last year. Retakes account for a significant increase in the percentage that you typically see. And finally, and just frankly, I don't know that our families and our students and our schools were as focused on the SOLs as they're in a normal year, and I don't think you saw the high-stakes pressure that I think will inherently actually increase the results. And bringing the accreditation model back will add to that. Now, some will say that's a good thing, some will say that's a bad thing, but I think it's important to know how our students are really doing. And I think that this year, I don't think we'll get all the way back to where we were in 2019, but I think that some of those double-digit and multi-double-digit declines that Senator Newman talked about are going to grow significantly in this school year with the strategies in place.
Did you have a follow-up, Senator Newman?
I did, yes, and thank you for that. And I know it's been as challenging for you the last 2 years as any administration ever. On participation rate, I've heard a little bit of the opposite, that those that did not participate tended to be those that did not perform as well, and I wondered if that is a general application, but I would agree with you on the retake. The retake very clearly is an opportunity for improvement out there, and I guess since this may be my last question, I did just urge you, I know that some of the federal money did not come with some of the strings that we would like to have put on those, but I do continue to urge you to have metrics, and the truth, I think, oftentimes drives results, and so the degree that you can metric the program, the spending, and the improvement, I think will drive better improvement. So just those items.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I agree with you, and we'll certainly continue to promote the results of our assessments so that we can track that progress.
Madam Chair.
Senator Norman and then Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sir, first of all, I'd compliment you on your efforts. For those of us that don't concentrate on K-12, your presentation is almost an information overload. An awful lot of data in there that probably could be broken down into 2 presentations. But I think we all are examples of life's experiences when we come here. And I live in an interesting area that enjoys a certain degree of affluence, nothing like Reston, but a certain degree of affluence. But we also have about a 20% poverty rating within my area. And I put that in the context of pre-K and K. I know in our area, as late as the first part of October, the school system was looking for kindergarten teachers because they did not have enough teachers to appropriately accommodate the student population that was coming in. And once they were able to get some of those teachers, even though they were experienced kindergarten teachers, what they found is that these kindergarten students were totally unprepared for kindergarten, that they didn't even have some of the fundamental basic knowledges, and I'm not speaking just educational, I'm talking social issues, understanding my desk is my desk, not your desk, those type of things. And so you've talked about millions and millions of dollars in your presentation. And based on my experiences and what I know anecdotally, I think that the situation with kindergartens is much worse than what your numbers are showing. And so I would encourage you to look at putting some additional resources. I know what you are doing, but put additional resources in trying to catch those kindergartners up who did not have the opportunity for pre-K for a variety of reasons. Because if we don't catch those kindergartners up and focus resources, and that's money and personnel, if we don't focus it on them, it is going to carry forward into the future grades.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Senator McClellan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And this is more a comment than a question, and I think it piggybacks off of what Senator Norment says. Increasingly, early childhood education is where the soft skills are taught. Used to be taught in kindergarten, it's not anymore. So you're exactly right that when childcare and daycare centers and early learning centers shut down, some of them permanently during COVID, and we already didn't have enough to meet demand, that problem's gotten worse and is going to continue to decrease the number of students who are kindergarten ready. On top of that, and I think this is also triggering off of your conversation with Senator Newman, kids are not okay. We have talked about, but I think we have underestimated the toll the pandemic has had on our children's mental health. And that is going to be reflected in kindergarten readiness, in PAL scores, and in any testing we try to do. Because the kids are not okay. The shutdown impacted them in ways we don't yet fully understand, and the return to school has impacted them in ways we don't yet fully understand. At the same time, we already didn't have enough counselors and mental health professionals in that building. Our teachers and employees could use some counseling themselves because they're not okay. And until we get wrap our arms around that and invest funds in addressing that, this learning loss recovery is not going to happen in a year. I see it with my kids. I see it with kids in Richmond. I hear it from counselors in Winchester and all parts of the state. The kids are not okay. And we need to understand that and shift our investments earlier as quickly as possible, and in counseling and behavioral health and support personnel, and see the connection between that and instruction.
Thank you, Senator. And we certainly have made student and staff mental health a priority in our plans, and we'll continue to support initiatives there. I will say that One of the issues majorly impacting our early childhood in our schools is the shortage that I mentioned. And I will tell you that whether it's talking to the Child Care Association or talking to our K-12 superintendents, salary is a huge issue. We're at a crisis point, and I think we've done some great work to improve salary and should be proud of that. But I think it's going to take a significant investment in that space to encourage people to come into the field.
Madam Chair.
Senator Hanger.
Thank you. I'd like to inject a positive note, if I could, at this moment. I've, as a comment, participated in the Southern Legislative Conference for a number of years. And this past summer, with the now 15 states that comprise that conference, when they did educational metrics in terms of outcomes and what have you, Virginia was head and shoulders above our colleagues in the southern states. And it's not that we should be complacent, because, I mean, you know, we want to continue to strive to do better. We've gone through a troubled time, and some of the issues, in my opinion, Madam Chair, are not going to be dealt with directly by government because they're societal issues. We all have mental stress these days because of what's going on in our society. But Virginia historically has done very well in education. Our weak area, I think, perhaps on the metrics was the fact that we spent enough in total, perhaps compared to the other states, on education per student, but it was heavily tilted more toward local government input as opposed to state government input.
Well, thank you for your very thorough and I don't know if it's discouraging or encouraging, but at least we have our marching orders. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next and last is Patricia Bishop, who's director of the VRS. If any of you have looked at this presentation before now, you'll know it's very complicated, and we're going to need to pay very close attention. Thanks, Patricia.
Well, good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for the introduction. This morning I'll be covering a few areas: membership, investments, funded status, contribution rates, a little bit about the hybrid retirement plan, and then potential strategies that could be used to address unfunded liabilities. So this slide represents the more than 750,000 members that we serve. We administer 3 benefit tiers, Plan 1, Plan 2, and the Hybrid Retirement Plan. The Hybrid Retirement Plan is the plan for new members, with the exception of those who are in hazardous duty positions, such as the state police or correctional officers or local government employees in hazardous duty positions. The Hybrid Retirement Plan is growing, and it now represents about 1/3 of our active membership. And later we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that plan. I'll turn now to investments. You may not realize, but VRS paid more than $5.5 billion in benefits to our members and beneficiaries in fiscal year 2021. About 86% of our retirees remain in Virginia. So this means that these dollars are recirculated back into state and local economies. It's really also important to note, as shown here, that historically approximately 2/3 of benefits are funded by investment income, and which is why our investment team is so keenly focused on managing our investment program for the long term. This slide shows a view of the value of the VRS Trust Fund over time. You'll notice there are a few dips early in the 2000s. We had the tech bubble, and then, of course, 2008, 2009, the Great Recession. But despite these dips, over the long term, the fund has maintained steady growth. And even after the volatility associated with the pandemic, the fund balance as of June 30th stood at $101.8 billion, which is a historic high for the fund. Unaudited as of 10/15, the value of the trust was $104.3 billion. This slide gives you an idea of representing annual investment returns. The lime green line is the VRS long-term assumed rate of return, which is 6.75%. We're an investor in both public and private assets, and so we experience impacts of market conditions, but we've positioned the portfolio to weather these impacts as well as possible over the long term. In any given year, you'll notice we're either above or below that lime green line. And this year was an outstanding year for the fund. The fund had a 27.5% return for the fiscal year ended June 30th. As we'll see in a moment, that outstanding return served to improve funded status as well as reduce our unfunded liabilities. So now that we've talked about plan membership and investments, I'll turn our focus to measures we use to look at the health of the plans and the funded requirements and contribution rates. So the funded status of a pension plan is a ratio of the assets available to pay benefits compared to the plan's liabilities. It's commonly used to gauge the health of a plan. The strong investment return, 27.5% this year, resulted in substantial improvements to the funded status on both a market value or an actuarial value of assets. On a market value, the funded status was 86.5% for the state plan, and on an actuarial value, it was 77.1%. As a reminder, on an actuarial value, we smooth those gains or losses over a 5-year period, and that's consistent with code language that requires us to develop rates, contribution rates that are relatively stable from year to year. Again, due to the almost 27.
Senator Sassol, do you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair.
At least I think we can let them believe that your danger zone is if you're below 80% funded. Is that still a general rule of thumb? Because it looks like we're coming back up over 80% based on your projections with respect to the state employees. Is that still what they use?
Sure. Madam Chair and Senator Sassala, thanks for the question. I think the actuarial community has said that you should always be striving to move toward 100% using reasonable assumptions over a reasonable period of time. When we think about bond rating agencies and other entities, there's been some movement in that general rule that has been historically the general rule of thumb. Less than 80% is considered a place that you don't necessarily want to be. However, when you have significant liabilities, and in our case in total roughly about $19 billion across all of our statewide plans, that always adds some additional volatility into your plans. We have about $19 billion across all of our statewide plans. And so about 2/3 of our contribution rate goes to fund or amortize our unfunded liabilities. So I think to some extent, 80% was the historical place that folks would not want to see you be less than, but always striving to move closer to 100% to reduce the volatility and pay down those unfunded liabilities. I hope that helps. Sure. Funded status of teachers shows a similar plan. And again, the market value, that was 86.5%. On an actuarial basis, 77.2%. And these, the unfunded liabilities did reduce from the prior fiscal year. So I'll leave funded status for a moment and transition to contribution rates. This graphic represents how contribution rates are developed. Each year we do an actuarial valuation, and a variety of elements go into the actuarial valuation, including demographic changes, investment returns, any benefit changes that have been implemented, along with changes that we've made from our last experience study. And the experience study compares our assumptions to the actual plan experience for a 4-year period. From all of these elements, a contribution rate for the plan is developed. We completed an experience study in the spring, and the results were incorporated into the actuarial valuations that we're completing this fall. So most significantly, the change out of the recent experience study was the change in our mortality assumption, which assumes members will be living longer, which in turn increases liability. However, the strong investment returns that we've experienced that I discussed earlier generally offset these liability increases. And so future rate adjustments related to mortality improvement should be minimized by using these new generational mortality assumptions, and also modifying these assumptions now serves to protect the fund for the future. So this chart presents the employer contribution rates. It shows you what they were for fiscal year 21 and 22, as well as the new contribution rates that the Board of Trustees certified last week for these statewide plans. We've also placed at the bottom of the table estimated general fund and non-general fund dollars needed to support the rates. A few things to point out here: due largely to investment gains, state and teacher rates are lower than they were in FY 2022. In addition, the teacher plan benefited from the $61.3 million infusion that you appropriated last year. In contrast, you'll see that the SPORS, VALORS, and JRS plans all experienced rate increases, and this was related to assumption changes and other demographic experience, which were not fully offset by investment gains. This next slide, I'm always asked about the unfunded liabilities of the plans, and this slide provides those to you on both a market value and, again, on an actuarial basis. And so, as you can see here, most of the unfunded liabilities declined over the period. Again, you'll see that on an actuarial basis, VALOR, SPORS, and JRS, they did, because of the assumption changes, that those contribution rates those liabilities did increase. Total unfunded liabilities on an actuarial basis across all of the state-side systems is $19.4 billion, or $11.6 billion on a market value. The next slide talks about the contribution rates for the other post-employment benefits. This is group life, health insurance credit, as well as the VSDP program. Due mainly to the investment returns, all of the OPEB contribution rates declined. The next slide provides the unfunded liabilities associated with the OPEB plans, and you'll see here unfunded liabilities decreased for the OPEB plans, and the funded status for these plans also improved. I will point out that the funded status of the state health insurance credit program did improve quite a bit, and this was due in large part to the cash infusion of $38.7 million that you approved last session. So I'll spend just a few minutes discussing the hybrid retirement plan, how it compares to Plan 1 and Plan 2, and as well as what the hybrid plan looks like compared to other states. And then I'll talk a little bit about some prior legislative proposals that were developed to essentially improve outcomes for hybrid retirement plan participants. As a reminder, the hybrid retirement plan combines elements of both a defined contribution plan, which is like a 401k plan, and a defined benefit plan, which is a pension plan that provides a monthly benefit for a lifetime based on a formula. The defined contribution plan is portable, and so that is valued by the membership. The DB portion of the plan requires a 4% mandatory employee contribution, and the defined contribution portion requires a 1% mandatory employee contribution. Just by way of background, following the Great Recession, the hybrid retirement plan was designed and developed to share risk between the employer and employee. And to illustrate, the hybrid retirement plan reduces employer investment risk by about a third. It also provides additional portability through the use of a defined contribution component. And finally, the hybrid plan's different age, service, COLA, and multiplier provisions serve to lower the future costs of the plan, and these savings are then blended into the contribution rates over time. As I shared earlier, the hybrid retirement plan is growing steadily and has about 127,000 members. The largest group of hybrid plan participants is our teachers. Most hybrid plan members are relatively new to their positions with less than 3 years of experience. And as they're relatively new employees, their average salary is about $45,000. So this slide compares income replacement across Plan 1, Plan 2, and the hybrid plan. On the left side of the slide, you'll see what Plan 1 and Plan 2 would be, which is about 50% of pre-retirement income after a full 30-year career. On the right side of the slide, you'll see the hybrid plan scenarios. And the green portions of the bar relate to the defined contribution component of the plan. The blue is the defined benefit portion of those plans. And so after a full 30-year
Yeah, I was just discussing with Senator Norman. Several years ago, when we moved to the hybrid plan, I remember we were told then, at least if I remember correctly, that to get what you were getting under the original, the old plan, after 30 years of retirement would require you to work 36 or 37 years to get the same amount. Is that essentially accurate?
I believe that's roughly true. I'm looking at, or is it? Yeah, I think that is about correct.
Okay.
And so they can get also, Madam Chair, they can also get to roughly the same place, but they do have to pay more to do it. So for example, a Plan 1 or Plan 2 member would pay 5% of pay to achieve a 50% income replacement ratio. If you maxed out your voluntary contributions in the defined contribution portion of the plan, you'd be paying in total 9% of salary to achieve that roughly same 51% income replacement ratio after a 30-year career. So turning now just to give an overview of the landscape. Since the Great Recession, like Virginia, a number of states have moved to cash balance or hybrid retirement plans. There are about 14 other states that use a hybrid model. If we compare Virginia to these other plans, what we find is that most other states provide larger contributions to the DC portion of the plan. And in about a third of the plans, the employer fully funds the defined benefit portion of the plan without a required member contribution. However, it's a mixed bag among the others, and about a third of the plans, employee has to contribute about 4% or less to the DP portion of the plan. As a reminder, our hybrid plan members contribute 4%. And in about a third of the plan, the employee has to contribute more than 4%. And so there were several proposals that have been submitted through the legislature over time, trying to improve some of the outcomes for our hybrid retirement plan members. And prior legislative proposals included accelerating the plan's auto-escalation feature from every 3 years to every 2 years, and pairing it with auto-enrolling individuals in the voluntary portion of the plan at a 0.5% of pay. Also changing the allocation of the mandatory member contribution between the defined benefit and the defined contribution portions of the plan would serve to increase the member's contribution to the DC plan. And so any of these suggestions would likely help members save more for their futures. On this slide, we've put together estimates of the costs associated with enacting these proposals. We've just assumed that about 50% of members wouldn't opt out of the provisions, because with all of these types of auto-enroll and auto-escalation features, you do have to provide the member the opportunity to elect not to participate. But the cost is initially slightly more than 1% of pay, or about $48 million to implement these initiatives, and about 2.5% of pay over time when you have more of your population within the hybrid retirement plan. So this last slide here just shows you the changes to a member's income replacement if these potential legislative proposals were enacted, and they're on the sort of right side of the slide and kind of the hash marks. And you can see that the changes make a much bigger difference for the folks who weren't making voluntary contributions from the second from right. Their income replacement would go up about 6 But members who are taking full advantage already would still have about the same income replacement ratio, but they would be paying 8% instead of the current 9% for the benefit. So those are just a few examples of things that could be done.
Madam Chair? Thank you, Madam Chair. I assume you have here VRS hybrid minimum and maximum. I assume is your assumption somewhere, if you had to guess, would your assumption be somewhere in the middle between those two as to what is likely to happen?
Yes, Senator Marsden, I think you're correct. You're probably, we find that for those who decide to make voluntary contributions in general, they go all in. But for those who don't, they tend to just rely upon the auto escalation features. So you're right, it would fall somewhere in the middle. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll turn a little bit now to some strategies that could potentially enhance funding should resources be available. And as we talked about earlier, the reason for these strategies is really that we still have fairly significant unfunded liabilities related to the plans, and that's where the volatility lies in the contribution rate that we have to, which is about 2/3 of the overall contribution rate, relates to amortizing the unfunded liability over time. So reducing using a structured plan to pay off the unfunded liabilities over time, we want to reduce plan costs by avoiding that compound interest that's charged when we amortize over really long periods of time. And paying down those unfunded liabilities on a more accelerated basis may also help cushion any potential uncertainty that occur with future market downturns. So just as we talked about earlier, this shows the funded status and liabilities related to the left side is the pension plans, the right side is the other post-employment benefits. The other post-employment benefits are not as well funded as the pension plans, but their total liability is considerably less. So listed here are several strategies. First is to shorten the amortization period, which is essentially like saying instead of a 20-year mortgage, you'd shorten it to a 15-year. The next is a level dollar amortization method rather than a level percent of pay. And essentially a level dollar method front loads payments. It reduces risk somewhat because it protects you against a potentially shrinking payroll, because level percent of pay assumes that payroll will grow over time. Another strategy that could be used is maintaining current contribution rates, even if experience lowers the employer rate, which is what had occurred this year for the state and teacher plans, for example. And as you have done in the past, providing one-time infusions improves the plan health. And then obviously to avoid adding additional unfunded liabilities before making any benefit enhancements, ensuring that you fully fund those enhancements. So on the next several slides, I'll provide some examples of the strategies. And so first, shortening the amortization period or accelerating the payback of unfunded liabilities.
I'm sorry, could I ask you a question about the previous slide? Are these in any particular order? Are these your preferred order or just suggestions?
Just general suggestions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And I should probably note, Madam Chair, that some of it depends on what's available and how, and so other budgetary resources sometimes drive which option might be most agreeable. Okay. An example of accelerating the payback of the one. I'm sorry. An example of the shortening the amortization period could be with using the state health insurance credit plan and lowering that from 22 to 20 years. And that could save about, I'm sorry, I've used the wrong example. So reducing the amortization period from 22 years to 20 years for the state pension plan would increase annual cost by about 0.73% of pay, or initially about $30 million. But interest savings over the 20-year period could be about $915 million. So next, talk a little bit about the level dollar payment. And And this, again, as I noted, could be more favorable if headcounts or payrolls are not expected to increase as anticipated. And so moving to a level dollar payment for the state health insurance credit plan, for example, could save $106 million in interest payments over time. But it would require a rate increase of approximately 0.27% of covered payroll. But this would become less expensive than the current method after about 10 years. An initial increase in funding would be about $21 million. An example of a one-time infusion was the $38.7 million you appropriated last session to the state health insurance credit plan, which increased the funded status from about 14.7 to 18.4%. And the additional contribution also lowered the employer contribution rate by about 4 basis points, which would save approximately $3 million in FY22. Maintaining higher contribution rates is another option. As I mentioned, the teacher rate had favorable experience this year, and the rates would have dropped from 16.62 to 14.76. So if that higher rate were maintained, you'd collect $345 million in contributions over the biennium, which would improve the funded status by about 70 basis points and lower unfunded liabilities by nearly $382 million without necessarily increasing additional budget effort. So those are the various potential options that could be available. There may be others. Those are just some examples.
Madam Chair, question?
Senator Marston.
Thank you so much. If all of these were successfully implemented and what have you, what impact do you think it would have on the rating, if you will, of our pension plans in terms of their, how solid they are and where their risk is?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Marsden, I think, all of these things to do in aggregate would probably be a fairly substantial lift. But any of these items do serve to lower liabilities, shorten your payments, and often save on interest payments. So they would all be a positive for the fund and help improve the overall health of the fund. They're all viable options for that.
Madam Chair, but you couldn't put a number on that because that's...
We could potentially put some from to it in aggregate, but I probably wouldn't be able to do it off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
As I stand here, but we will certainly follow up with staff and the committee with some additional information on that for sure.
Thank you.
Lastly, the Board of Trustees plans to submit legislation this year during the upcoming session, and the proposed legislation would really separate the defined contribution component of the hybrid plan from the total contribution rate, which is currently a blend of those two items. And so by separating the rate into two components, we hope that it would alleviate some of the administrative burden on our participating employers and allow members additional flexibility to change their voluntary contributions more often, and also allow those contributions to be invested more quickly, because it would allow our employers to administer the DC portion of the hybrid plan in a way that is much more similar to the way they administer other supplemental plans. And so with that, Madam Chair, we are really honored to serve the Commonwealth's public servants, and we really try to continue to improve and innovate over time to help our members plan for tomorrow today. This concludes my prepared remarks, but I'd be happy to address any further questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Trish? Senator Parker.
Quick question here. If I recall correctly, the plans have been to try to reach full assets within this, the pension plans by somewhere in the mid-30s, 2030s. With the boost that we got in 2021, is that going to impact it in any way, or is it just being reflected in lower rates that are paid in?
Right. Madam Chair and Senator Barker, it would be about 2043 where we would be, where we would pay off that legacy liability. And so we are reflecting some of the excess gains in lower contribution rates. Did I miss anything? I'm looking to our staff actuary to make sure I don't misstate.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you have any sense of whether there's been any significant impact of the pandemic on VRS and your projections? Do you have any sense of that or any data?
Yeah. Madam Chair and Senator Marsden, we have been looking at what has been coming through in terms of our valuations and the data on active membership. We have seen some more terminations, particularly in the teacher population, than we would normally expect. But it's still a little bit too early to tell if there will be any real changes related to COVID, but we are monitoring that.
Okay, any more questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's very helpful. Okay, I'd like to now turn the meeting over to April, who has a quick announcement for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly for the members, just a reminder that the next time the committee will meet will be at the annual meeting or the retreat. It will be at the Hotel Roanoke, and it will be on November 19th or November 18th and 19th, and we'll be back to your normal schedule, where the first day will be a half day starting around lunchtime, and the second day will go through midday as well. And I know Melissa Mays in our office has been in touch with a number of you, provided with forms for lodging, et cetera. But if you have any additional questions or need assistance, please let us know and give us a call. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, if anyone has any comments, no further business, then the committee is adjourned.